the reason I wanted to meet today is so in conjunction with the VCU seminar, it's a mini university on mental health, and I think it's going to be very useful. And anybody who can stay for it, I would urge you to try to do that. The work groups met yesterday, and with the goal, while this commission runs through the end of next year, our goal is to try to figure out what our legislative agenda, what sort of bills we're going to introduce in the next session. Beginning our next meeting next month, we're going to meet at Northern Virginia Mental Health Institute, and then we'll have one more meeting this year after that. And so between the meeting next month and the meeting at the end of the year, we're going to come up with our legislation for the year. We've got a pretty ambitious agenda in both sub-work groups, and while I think we need to be urgent about our work, we need to stay focused on making sure we can get done by the end of next year. Delegate Hope.
This is a question, Mr. Chairman. I know that this commission sunsets or expires at the end of next year. Why don't we think about extending it longer so that we can have more than just a 1 or 2 year plan? We can plan 3, 4, 5 years down the road. There's so much to accomplish.
Delegate Hope, we started out with a 4-year plan, and we extended it 2 years, so it's been a 6-year plan. You know, I'm cognizant of the fact that the work will never be finished, that we will continue to have needs and continue to have to progress on those. And that's certainly, whether we're going to extend this commission or hand it off to someone else, it's certainly something we can consider. But I think the deadline allows us to keep some sense of urgency to our work. And I want to try to get as much accomplished as we can by the end of next year. And certainly we have a refreshing of the people next year. We have an election. We all have to go through that. And I think it's important that we stay focused on the time we've got. In your material is mental health standards for Virginia's local and regional jails. Now, you might remember Dr. Schaefer, I think, at the Marion meeting, gave a report of this, but the final report wasn't actually done yet. And so this is the final report that hopefully will answer any questions that were left from his presentation in Marion. And with that, does anybody else have anything they want to, Delegate Bell, how late did your meeting go yesterday? 5 o'clock. Sure.
Mr. Chair, the subcommittee met and had, I thought, some pretty interesting testimony on 2 topics. The first was, as you know, we have looked at ways, in fact, if anything, we have 2 ambits. One is to divert mentally ill people out of the criminal justice system and into the mental health system. And second, provide better care while they're in the criminal justice system if they land there. Regarding the first, we had explored various avenues. Bills had been proposed about how we might set up mental health courts. And simultaneous and parallel with what we were doing, the courts just went and did it. And that's not a bad thing at all. That's a good thing. And so we brought in Judge Downer, who's my local district court judge. He runs the mental health docket in Charlottesville. And we provided, at least for me, a wealth of interesting information about what they're doing. He did say that please let them and other courts try things for a while before we come up with any kind of unified system. He said that they're doubtless going to make some mistakes as they go, and this is a chance to figure it out sort of on a pilot project basis, if you will, before some unified system comes in, if we even need one. So in some ways, we're going to plant the flag and say that project looks like it's rolling, and we may not have some big bills come forward this year because it may turn out that we're better off letting them go with what they've got for a while and before we come back. There were some minor legislative issues about sharing of information that we can probably take care of.
You know, and Delegate Bell, I apologize I wasn't able to stay for the whole presentation of Judge Downer's. Wasn't able to stay for his whole presentation. I was a little interested. He said that the model he's following is the same court type model they're using in Stanton and in Roanoke. It's my understanding there's a mental health court at least in Norfolk. In addition to that, but it's a different model. Was there any discussion of that?
He did mention the Norfolk court. He was very specific to say it's not a separate court, it's a separate docket, and that
Right.
means things both legally, but how he treats it. But he said that Stanton has been going since 14. He's brand new. This is his first year trying it. He did say, gosh, it'd be nice to have more courts doing things so that we could try different things and swap data and swap ideas.
And I think he said there were 10 people in the program, 7 people waiting, and so there's really not enough data to know
That's right.
whether he's diverting people from jail long-term or whether there's any cost savings.
17 total, 2 had washed out. We encouraged the system, and we kind of looked over at the appropriations people to say that this does have some dynamic benefits in terms of cost. So there's some upfront costs, you got to get a coordinator, but surely, the whole point of this is to keep people out of jail. There should be some benefits at the back end that they should try to calculate as it gets more, like you say, a larger sample size.
One thing I was interested in, he said, while the paperwork said it's a misdemeanor court, misdemeanor it's post plea, there was at least one felony, I guess, that had been reduced to a misdemeanor.
Right. So this was post plea, everything agreed to by the Commonwealth. So in terms of a gatekeeper, that's where the gatekeeper is. But as you said, he's a misdemeanor court. He can only do a felony if it has been reduced to a misdemeanor. So these are cases that the Commonwealth has concluded that worst comes to worst, if they just decide to go forward with sentencing, they're satisfied with doing it on a misdemeanor basis.
You know, my understanding in maybe Norfolk is that there's also some effort to do this at the felony level in the circuit court. And I think it would be interesting to maybe get somebody down there to report on what they're doing so we can figure out what the differences are and what works and what doesn't.
Sure. At some point, you segue into the whole not guilty by reason of insanity cohort. And so that at some point, it would be so serious and such a big deal that we have a system in place for that. But everybody understands that doesn't work well for the more run-of-the-mill, everyday nuisance cases. That's sort of for the biggest cases. And so I don't know where the line would be, but that would be something we could explore.
Senator Mason has raised an issue over the years, or over the past year, we've been involved in a discussion. The number of patients in Eastern State Hospital contains a large number of not guilty by reason of insanity. And if you look at the numbers, you would think that the region of the state that's served by that hospital has a really super number of NGRI people. And he tells me that some of the folks, and I've had some conversation with the Chief Justice about this, and he did a survey of the judges, and the judges indicate that there's more agreement, that the reason there are more people down there that are NGRI in the hospital is because there are more agreements between the Commonwealth and those regions of the state. And you and I, as lawyers, we know that NGRI standard is pretty high, and there are very few people that actually meet it in Virginia. I don't know if that's, I don't know if it's a matter of prosecutors and courts and defense lawyers coming together and realizing a person has need of services even though they might not meet the standard and then agreeing to an NGRI. But Senator Mason says that some of the people, I guess inside the hospital he's talking to, tell him that they raise issues that they're concerned that process is being abused to some extent.
When we went to visit, I don't recall if any other members sat down, but I sat down afterwards, after our formal meeting. I asked the administrator to bring in some of the patients, and we actually chatted for about an hour, and they raised issues similar to that.
Okay.
They have their own concerns and sort of agendas, but.
Okay, Delegate Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add that the judge was very firm on the question that no NRGI are included in this program. It's much more of a therapeutic emphasis of doing all of the prescribed treatment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, with a volunteer navigator to make sure that you keep appointments, and so that this is where the washout came, that the issue is those who, if you were not guilty by reason of insanity, then that would be a whole nother course and a whole nother outcome. I would also add that for each one of these 17, including the 3 who have moved to a second level of compliance, we are at the very least saving jail costs. And then finally, while Delegate Robinson can certainly speak for herself, she had already glanced at their application to the Supreme Court to start this docket and mentioned to me that I'm sorry, forgive me. Uh, My deep apologies. But I was just going to say that, that in their application, there's a great deal of indication about where money savings are. And so that as we look through that application, we might be in a better situation to talk to these other courts to see what is in fact playing out. And again, my apologies to Delegate Ranson.
Yeah, my impression yesterday, at least I was impressed by the fact that there are at least two triggers in that whole program. One initial screening and a second full mental health evaluation that's done at CSP to make sure that you don't have people who are, that people aren't referred to this program in Charlottesville inappropriately. Okay, with Senator Barker, we now have a quorum, but we don't have anything to vote on.
Mr. Chair, there was another
Delegate Bell.
issue, and if Delegate Hope wants to take this up, he had a bill this year that asked us to review the segregation policies at DOC. And we had a lengthy PowerPoint presentation from DOC reps, and then Delegate Hope had some colloquy with them along with some of the other legislators. But he
the only
may
thing-
wish to tell us what he thought he saw.
Yeah, the only thing I will add is that I think it's the charge of this joint subcommittee to take a look at the structure and funding of what's happening in the community. And we've recently, because of a lot of deaths in jails, we've expanded our charge to look at jails in the same area. And concerns have been brought over the years, and I'd like this group to take a look at prisons. And then to have the Department of Corrections to have us believe that those people that are in isolation and segregation for years, none of them have serious mental illness is really hard for me to believe when all the evidence and research internationally says otherwise. And so I think it's still something that we need to take a look at, despite what the Department of Corrections believes that there's no one with serious mental illness. And NAMI made a very good point in their public comment when the Department of Corrections noted that 4% of their prison population has a serious mental illness, when the entire country's population is 3%, and they would lead us to believe that theirs is only 1% higher than the rest of the country, is really hard for me to believe. And so I think we need to get a better grasp of understanding of who those people are and what their degree of serious mental illness is.
And I guess the last couple of days, we've seen a number of articles about a suit regarding a person who's been in the Department of Corrections allegedly in isolation for the last 12 and a half years. And, you know, that there's some mental illness issues raised there. And you know, my impression would be that if he really was in isolation for 12 and a half years, if he were not ill going in, he probably would have been ill at some point in the process. But that's, I guess, going to be determined in the courts. Okay, well, there's nothing else for us to do, I guess, except for the seminar the seminar that's going to happen at 9:30. So does anyone else have anything they want to raise? Okay, well, we're going to adjourn. Dr. Silverman, we're in your hands.